what an incredible day yesterday was, and what a great start to today. You actually had an excellent Futures and Foresight lesson just now from the panelists. They discussed 3 horizons. But what I'm going to do is just talk about something that is very key to my heart, which is the importance of foresight as a skill in the 21st century to learn. And so, there's a very diverse crew amongst us all. I thought I would give a quick introduction and definition to what foresight is. It's a pragmatic approach to be explicit that tomorrow is not going to be like today. But just because it's different doesn't mean there isn't a systematic and structured way of thinking about that future. So we are being very pragmatic. There are tools that you can use. The panelists talked about 3 horizons, but you also have the futures triangle, where you explore how the weight of the past supports you and holds you back, how the push of the present can sometimes keep you stuck in the here and the now, but also the pull of the future brings you forward. But the most important thing I want to underline with the tool and the approach of foresight is that this is about imagining different futures together. Now, there's lots more other tools that you can use, but most importantly, I want to bring us back to something that we discussed at this closing session yesterday, at that very powerful playback stage. Someone asked, where is the human in this future that we are describing? And what I would like you to get out of this session is that Futures and Foresight is a practice for people to think about the future, because ideas about the future never change the world. It's people using ideas about the future that's going to change the world. So today, we are going to think about, as Bhavna just said, and as the panelists just said this morning, what is the world that we're preparing for? And what is the world that we want to shape? How can we use foresight to do this? And we're going to go through a series of projects, case studies, and examples and tools that will hopefully inspire you around how to do that. Now, why is this important? There is a growing awareness around the world, whether you're looking at Nepal, Morocco, Mauritius, Portugal, the US. We need to stop being so short-term. We need our decision-making, our institutions and our governments to look at the long term. We are also increasingly aware that the impact of changes, whether it's climate, job losses from emerging technology, they are affecting different generations in different ways. A grandfather, a great-grandfather, has had much less impact of climate than his great-grandchild. So, before we get into thinking about how you, whether you're at school, you're teaching at school, whether you're a civil society organization, whether you're using AI, how you can use futures, I'd like to ask you first a question. So please get your phone out and let's do a quick Menti question. What stops you from integrating thinking about the long term in your work? What is it that gets in the way? So I'll give you a few seconds to use the code. It's 64467397. And then there, you'll have 5 multiple choice questions. Is it you don't have the skills? Is it that you don't know where to start? Are there organizational barriers that stop you from doing this? Or is it just that you don't think it's that important? Or it may be another reason. Has everybody got through? A few more minutes? A few more seconds? Do you need the skills? Are there barriers in the organization? Do you know where to start? Okay, do we have results, Shalini? Let's turn to the results. Too many barriers. Does anybody want to shout out quickly, what are the kind of barriers that you might face? There's a gentleman over there at the back.
Hi. So I'm working with Q2L. So the problem is like there are a lot of barriers, especially from stakeholders when you work with, especially government and all. So we are coming with a lot of future thinking ideas and all, but there is a pipe always there. So you have to reshape it and go through it. So that is one of the biggest barriers which we are facing.
Yeah. Thank you. So working with others, sometimes there's financial barriers. The budgeting cycle can also be against it. Understanding amongst some of your stakeholders. What about, that's actually almost half of the people. What about someone who doesn't know where to start? Does anybody want to give an example of what would really make a difference to you in terms of starting? Put your hand up if you completed that one. Thank you, sir.
So with respect to don't know where to start, it feels like with long-term thinking, you need a lot of structure, frameworks to be made, right? So I think don't know where to start and too many barriers somehow are way too connected, because when we are working in a workplace, there are way too many barriers, systemic barriers, financial barriers, and then to balance all of that, you somehow are not able to take out the time. That's where the stage of don't know where to start comes in.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And I look forward to hearing the 15% of others. But I'm going to invite you throughout this hour that we have together to look out with your pen and paper or your phone. By the end of this session, I would really like you to have got one big aha from this discussion. What is one thing that has reframed the way that you look at the future? I would also invite you, as you're listening to me and my colleagues speak, what are two things that you're going to do differently as a result of what we've discussed now? And finally, we're going to go through a lot of frameworks, a lot of tools, a lot of resources. You're not going to want to use all of them, but are there three things that you want to use? Okay? I'm looking for some nods and some smiles. Yes, good. Thank you. Excellent. So, a little bit about myself. I have done Futures and Foresight not for the many years. She made me sound geriatric, seriously. For a few years, I have done Futures and Foresight, both in government, at the UK Prime Minister's Strategy Unit under Tony Blair, which does make me quite old, actually, and also with the UN, with different governments, businesses, and civil society organizations, from WHO to the Organization of Migration, and many other beyond. And I am really passionate about the fact that it's something that someone said yesterday, the capacity to look into the future and do futures work is going to be a critical skill for us to learn for the 21st century. And that is because if you do not imagine and create your future, someone else is going to do it for you. If you do not imagine and create your future, someone else is going to do it for you. So my personal mission is, as the person over there said, that we use Futures and Foresight to build our agency and sense of hope in a world that feels turbulent and can feel overwhelming when other people are setting what that future looks for you. So this is an agenda of empowerment. And I am writing a book at the moment called Playing with Time, which is not a toolkit, but it is about how you can use Futures and Foresight for a tool of empowerment. And I invite you not to think of this as an engineer or just something that you learn, but think of Futures and Foresight and Playing with Time as if you are a sailor. You are exploring the future like an uncertain sea. You may have storms ahead, you don't know where you're going, but you can use your compass and your stars to guide you. Or you can think about playing with time and the future as a gardener. You are planting seeds, we heard that this morning, that will take time to grow, perhaps 50 and 100 years. But there are cycles of the seasons that you can use. And actually what's important is not to determine what it looks like, but the health of your garden with the bees and the birds and the diversity of the ecology. Or you can think of yourself as a weaver, weaving strands from your history and the world around you as you walk into the past and into the future. Or, and this is often my preferred archetype, you can consider yourself as a jester, as a clown. Because after all, as Bhavna says, the future is only a story that you tell yourself in the present. Yeah? You can be creative, you can be imaginative, you can be foolish, you can be crazy, and most importantly, as the role of the jester in the court, you have the task to speak truth to power. So, my organization that has been running for 15 years does this, and we help people use structured thinking about the future, but people using structured thinking about the future, to drive change today for the well-being of current and future generations, as the gentleman said earlier. And we do that in various ways. We work with foundations, governments, civil society organizations. For example, young people, old people, for the government of Oman, doing the Future Plan for Oman 2040. But also then, during the COVID pandemic, where everybody was looking at the next 3 months, we knew, because of pandemics in the past, that the true impact of COVID would be in 10 years' time, as the impact plays out on younger people. So starting to get people to think about that. Rethinking higher education with the university sector and the education ministry in Malaysia, thinking about how can a university of the future that is going to be for generation alpha and betas, what does it teach? What does it look like? What kind of diversity of people are going, given that the US has just closed its border? How can it take advantage of all the geopolitical shifts so Malaysia can position itself well? And finally, let's look at the US, huh? It's a pretty tough situation, and there we've been working with a group of civil society organizations reimagining what a positive 2076 democracy looks like, the 300th anniversary of the Constitution, and bringing different people together. So my point is that you can do work directly with governments, civil society organizations, and bring them together. We also run future generations movements in different parts of the world. You don't need to look at the detail of this, but what this shows is that there is a whole wave of innovation across the world on governance mechanisms to do the right decisions for future generations as well as current generations. So, a few examples. Canada has its intergenerationally fair budget last year. The Pacific Islands did a 2050 futures scenarios that says, how can we build jobs for young people, address gender and indigenous stewardship issues, and also protect the environment all at the same time. Australia has been looking at tick-tock tax about how young people are getting the short straw on pensions and paying tax. How do you actually drive awareness about the importance amongst young people to actually have a system that is fair for them? In addition, you have Kenya, where you have the Generation Z riots. They have just set up a Futures Caucus in the Senate. Wales has got Future Generations legislation, and many more. But also, the third piece of work that we do as the School of International Futures is the thing that's most important, which is that we run a network of young Foresight practitioners around the world. 1,000 in over 100 countries. It's been running for the past 10 years, and we just have had a new set of fellows. Now, Indian applicants were the second largest, and the kind of things that they were particularly interested in was community-centered approaches, climate, and policy and governance. So, and I'm extremely glad to say that there were 3 fellowships awarded this year in India. So you've got Ria and Yashika, who are doing work on unsafe cities, how to build safe urban centers for women and marginalized communities. You've got Tanashri, who's looking at how you connect urban children to ecological and nature-based approaches and futures. And you've got Kushi, who is looking at space technologies and how they are governed at the moment by only a small number of private organizations, and we need to democratize space governance. So that's a little bit the kind of exciting work that is happening here amongst the Foresight practitioners in this country. And it's also this importance of intergenerational dialogue, radical honesty, and exchange is something that we model that's very, very important for the work of Futures and Foresight. And so we wanted to walk the talk, which is why I've invited Rohan Patanka, who is an NGFP fellow from 2020, to come and do this presentation with me. And we're going to share what are our top learnings from the journeys that we've had through using Foresight to create change up until now. Over to you.
All right. Cool, I'll use the mic. Hi, everyone. My name is Rohan. I work at a practice called Quicksand. We're based in Bangalore, Delhi, and Goa. We're a design thinking and innovation consulting practice. And I'll tell you the story of how we found our way into strategic foresight from some of the work that we were doing, but how also valuable it's been to be part of this global community. So like I said, Quicksand does design thinking, research, and innovation, mostly in the development sector. I work across health, gender, culture, but some of our work has also been in the humanitarian sector, which started really several years ago, but a big piece of work was with the Barbican Center in 2019, where they commissioned us to make an exhibit on the future of humanitarian work. And the big provocation that we made, including research, but also lots of new media work, was to really make the case for a world in which communities that are affected by disasters are able to help themselves. So aid doesn't have to come from foreign countries, and capacities are kind of built within communities. So this was an alternative future world in 2035, where communities and sort of people are able to become humanitarian workers for themselves and for each other. And this was exciting because then this made the case for another way of looking at the humanitarian sector at large. We presented this, and then several humanitarian organizations got interested in it, and also then we applied to be part of the Foresight practitioners group, and my colleague Aditya and I were trying to set up conversations on just what the future of humanitarian work could look like. And one organization in particular got super interested in this work, which is MSF, and they felt like the humanitarian world's future was in fact the future of MSF. And over a series of projects that we did with them, starting from 2019 all the way till 23, it was interesting to see how we kind of incrementally built work with them that also was a demonstration of building capacity in Foresight, but also a mindset shift within the organization. And of course, some of this happened because from the network, we got access to tools, experts, networks, and just access to being able to ask some of these questions around methodology and so on that we're forever grateful for, of course. So in 2019, we set up this workshop with MSF in Delhi, where we just got them to engage with the idea of long-term thinking, what it looks like for the humanitarian sector, etc. Following which, they invited us to join their 5-day sort of annual meeting that they do called MSF Co Days in Amsterdam, where we ran a parallel track on what the future of MSF Amsterdam looks like. And what was interesting was that as part of this, we also worked with 4 people, I'll speak about that in a moment, but create 4 parallel imaginations of what MSF could look like in the future. And one of those was to think about a regional office in South Asia. And excitingly, in 2022, they got back to us to say that from the provocation in 2019, they were able to make real and actual regional office in MSF South Asia, headquartered in Colombo, and they invited us to do a consultative long-term thinking report for them. So it's really a case for how, of course, there was an appetite, but really a future's way of thinking was able to fast-track some of this conversation and development within the organization, and that's some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. Cool. Maybe as I talk about this, we thought we'll structure this in a way of thinking about lessons that we've learned along the way. Of course, Kat has a few more years of experience than me, but we thought we'll share and exchange lessons. And the first big one was around this misconception that Foresight is really about predicting what the future holds. And maybe, Kat, if you want to come in and share.
I'll do that. Thank you, Rohan. Yeah, big, big, big lesson, not prediction. In fact, it's about reframing what is possible today. And the real benefit is threefold. You can, by doing this exercise, you both come together and imagine the future you want. Also, you become aware of the other possible futures that are less nice, that you may need contingency plans for. But the most important thing is, by looking out 20, 30 years into the future for the things you want and you don't want, you are actually building the muscle today. So you're building agility and capability. And let me bring that to life with a case study. You do not need to look at the details, maybe a little difficult to read, but the Director of Education at the UK London Borough of Newham came to us. It's a very deprived and mixed environment. They wanted to say, what does the future of education in our borough look like? And let's have an aspirational, exciting vision that brings together teachers, pupils, other people in the borough together. And so they pulled together an ambitious vision for 2030. In Newham, we will, and they put, what does it look like? And then, how do you actually achieve it? And the important thing to note is that technology is a part of this, but it is not the whole. So it is an enabling factor, but how people respond and use it is what was important. So, how about you? What was your first aha?
Yeah, very much connected to that, in fact, that Foresight for us became an opportunity to talk about the present moment, and in fact, it gave us the ability to have difficult conversations that were otherwise not possible. For example, in the case of MSF, what was glaring was that It's an international organization. They operate in 70 countries across the world. But they have 5 operation centers, and they're all based in Europe right now. So in case if there's a calamity, or this was the case in 2019 at least, when there's a calamity, the first phone call goes to an Amsterdam or a Paris, and then someone tells you what to do next, right? And they really have been wanting to think about what it means to think of MSF as a global organization, and yet all the fingers point to how the system that works presently is not working, and they need to change that, except that it needs to be had with leaders themselves who need to then step away, and it's a very awkward, difficult conversation to have. And what we found valuable was that Foresight was able to give us framing, so like you were saying, a starting point, right? A starting point that was not to look at the critique of the present model, but something that was fresh and alternative, that just gave people space to have constructive conversation that looked different. So for example, in Amsterdam, what we did was, as part of our consultation, we invited four MSFers, these women from different parts of the world, from East Africa, from the Middle East, from India, and from the International Geneva office, to make 4 parallel imaginations of what MSF could look like from where they stood. And what was valuable then was that this was a mixing of not just forecasting or foresight, but really their own grounded experience of what it's been like for them and what they see immediately happen, right? So this was also to say that there will be 4 parallel imaginations, and they're not one over the other. And this was helpful because by the end of this half day, already people were able to say, oh, I see this as an idea that's more meaningful. And suddenly, the whole defensiveness that usually happens when you think about organizational change did not sort of enter the room, and that was really powerful.
Yeah, and that's actually the value of having difficult conversations and, in fact, power brokering. Because if tomorrow is going to be like today, is not going to be like today, then the people who understand today possibly don't understand tomorrow. So Jim Data's second law of the future says, a useful idea about the future has, at first sight, got to appear ridiculous. So it often challenges people today, the ministers, the CEOs, the heads of the organizations. So you often have difficult conversations. This is why the 3 Horizons model that you have heard so much about over the past few days is so important. This morning, the young panelists referred to it. Horizon 1 is business as usual. It's the dominant way of thinking. It's the fact that today we drive, humans drive our cars are powered by petrol, and we have our cities are based on that system. But then there's Horizon 3, which is that emerging future. It's a future where we may have driverless cars, they are all electric, they're probably storages of energy, so the ownership of cars is different. And our cities may be designed differently as a result. And then you have Horizon 2, which is the messy middle, which is where you have entrepreneurial opportunities. You would look out there for new insurance for driverless cars. You would look out for new kinds of batteries that enable you to drive further. So this is why it's a very important model, and what you'll find is that it's about power. Horizon 1 doesn't realize that it's making assumptions about the future. Horizon 3 is creating dissenting ideas that's a shock, and Horizon 2 is the messy conflict that creates change. And the insight is that you can create coalitions between these different horizons. You need those horizons to work together to create change, because these guys have got the money and the decision-making power, but these guys are the ones that are actually creating and understanding what that future looks like. Now, what might it feel if you didn't understand or know this model? What might it feel if you are a minister or the head of an organization and you suddenly have these crazy ideas in front of you, the maintainers, the people who are just keeping the show on the road, and boy is it difficult at the moment, yeah, they're patronized about people in the future, they're told that they're stuck in the muds, and they're worried about things going wrong. The visionaries are like, why can't anybody else see things, right? Why is it that people can't see things that are really obvious? And why are people putting their heads in the sand? And then the entrepreneurs just basically think that these are stuck in the muds, and these are just, they have their head in the sky, and they're the ones that just make stuff happen. Now, these are all wonderful assets to tap into if you can bring it together. And an example of this is this project where, in fact, in digital technology and AI, when we talk about the governance of emerging technology, and by the way, we've talked a lot about AI today, but there are things like synthetic biology and many other new, probably much more disruptive technologies coming down the pipe towards us. We tend to go to the experts to say, how do you govern the risks from AI? So you've got people in the west coast of the US, in Europe, and in China. But we did a project which is like, let's ask Horizon 3 people, young Foresight practitioners in Africa, what they think the future of digital governance should be. Now, they are a community that don't have expertise, really, and often would find it very difficult to get their points of view credibly listened to and acted on by either policymakers or experts. But by using, especially 3 Horizons and Foresight, you are power brokering. You are giving validation to the insights of peripheral, indigenous ways of knowing, youth expertise, because they are often the ones that best see around the corner. And so, as a result of this work, they have taken their work, their manifesto, and I liked hearing about the youth manifesto this morning. They have taken it to the Africa Union, they took it to COP, and they're using it to engage with their political parties in their countries around the world. You
Great.
also used 3 Horizon, huh?
Yes, yeah, we did, yeah. So in the work that we did with MSF South Asia's regional office in their long-term sort of planning, we brought together, it was very helpful to have a tool like the 3 Horizons planning to think about what is opportunities or gaps that emerge in the middle. But we realized to do this, it was really important to really bring our constituents on the same page and build trust. That became really the currency with which anyone would be even interested in engaging with us. So even to do this in a 6-month process, what we first started with was a survey and focus group discussions and really trying to make the key people as part of our participation process really heard, and then figure out how to engage them meaningfully. So to us, it's really important, again, who you bring into the room, especially because consultative processes are also so much about power and what is heard, who is brought to the table, who is given space to speak, but also then think about how to engage them in a meaningful manner, in a way that they take away from it, but also collective ownership is built along in the process. Yeah. But I also spot that as we are thinking about this, and of course, with your help and work, we were able to get some frames, some frameworks, some skills like this or tools, but it seems like it's in fact required at several levels in the process, right? And Foresight seems to be doing different things across these levels. And maybe, Kat, if you could speak about that a bit.
Thanks, and that's my third aha, is that Futures and Foresight, you're doing it at different levels, but it needs to be connected. Now, there is the mindset. As an individual, you are thinking about the future. You're putting yourself into alternative futures. You can also, as an organization, as a group, like the Borough of Newham, looking at the future of education, they were doing a strategic planning process. So that was an intervention. did it with a group with a beginning, a middle, and an end. So Foresight as a project. But you also have Foresight or future readiness as a system. It's the qualities of the system. As we were showing you, all these countries that are beginning to change and embed future preparedness in their work. So you've already heard about the example of Newham, the beginning and middle and an end, a project. I'm going to share with you an example of how you incorporate futures into a mindset, into the curriculum of work, and I'm also going to tell you a story about a country, a nation, a small nation that does it really well, to illustrate that you actually need frameworks and tools at these different levels for change to happen. And it's important because often people say, oh, here's a tool, a futures lab, but that's not going to work for intervention or systems level. It'll only work for the mindset level. So knowing what you're trying to achieve and what level you're going in at is really important for choosing the tools and frameworks that you're using. So this is Teach the Future. As Peter Bishop says, we teach history in schools. Why don't we teach the future? So they have pulled together a curriculum, and they are working with secondary school educationists all around the world, and there is a hub here in India, in order to build a curriculum for secondary schools. They also do the Young Voices Awards and a podcast led by a young Indian member, actually, worth looking at. From the very different levels, so that's really building skill, foresight literacy amongst the whole population. It's a critical skill for everybody. Let's embed it in our schools. On the other level is a country that has really decided to lean in to build futures capability and integrate it into everything that they do as a nation. Wales, 10 years ago, passed the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It is a piece of legislation that requires every public body to ensure they do not compromise the needs of the future generations. Now, this has been very important. They have stopped roads being built through a nature reserve. They have changed the curriculum. I know someone here works with children in care. They have focused on key bits of the life cycle, pregnancy and children in care when they're going into adulthood, and putting UBI. Because of this, they have actually introduced a 20 miles an hour limit in the roads because of the benefits in health and infrastructure. So this is a country that has had a national conversation about the Wales we want. They said, what Wales do we want to leave for our children and our children's children? This is what they decided. You don't see GDP there, do you? Huh? You see culture, you see prosperity, you see equality. So this is what was put in the legislation. And you have a Future Generations Commissioner whose role it is to review and support. The Football Association uses it, the universities do, and local authorities. And there's even a Young Leaders Academy where there is a reverse mentoring between older ministers and heads of agencies and young people to do a reverse mentoring, powerful experience. So, what's your top tip for operating across this whirlpool, Rohan?
Yeah, I think my top tip is to find champions within systems. One such champion for us was Farhat Mantu. She was leading the India office. She invited us to go to Amsterdam to make the case, stage this process, and then ended up becoming director for MSF South Asia. And what's exciting for us was that she became really the steward for Foresight, and using Foresight in this way across different levels. So really thinking about how to build capacity within her team, stage it in a way that there is formal consultative process, and then really use it within the system to take this forward. Yeah. But like Farhat, I observed that there's several people across the world that seem to be championing Foresight work, and that's really how the field is moving forward. So maybe, Kat, if you want to give us more examples of that.
Yeah, and that's my final lesson, lesson 7, which is actually there's a big wave happening and there is a global moment. Last September, your country and every other country in the world came together to sign in New York a declaration on future generations. 3 things. There is a commitment, Article 28. If countries only do that and nothing else, it is a powerful statement that we need to develop, design, assess, and implement policies, thinking about the future generations, not just today. And there's a special envoy that is going to be set up, a Friends of group that if anybody is from the Indian government, we would very much invite them to join. And also a review is going to take place in 2028, where all countries come together and say, what have we achieved? These are the commitments in the declaration. Indigenous knowledge, using foresight and futures, being prepared for alternative futures. This is about mainstreaming into the ministries of federal and local and state governments how we do policy for the future. But the big question that everybody had asked a year ago was, how do you actually do that? So we pulled together, based on Wales and the many other countries that we work with, a guide that says these are the ingredients for success. And I'll quickly just outline that what is necessary at that systems level, at the government level, is yes, you have the technical expertise, that sectors are prepared for the future, but you need it to be engaging citizens, conversations with young people, and then you need leaders and politicians to be held to account. That is why scrutiny mechanisms like the Future Generations Commissioner, intergenerational fairness assessments, and legislation is so important. And so, yes, we were inspired by Wales, but also India is inspired by Wales too. So there are all these pockets of exciting innovations happening in Goa, where they're looking at intergenerational fairness assessments for the Sovereign Wealth Fund, for a possible Future Generations Bill introduced in Maharashtra state. And also, you can be inspired, if you look at this book, 1 year on, by all the many, many examples around the world in Cameroon with Indigenous Future Generations Commissioners, in Nigeria and Norway, in Japan, Futures Design, where they think about the 2063 future, and they make sure that when you deliberate, you have space for someone to represent unborn generations. Lots is happening. And now we're going to turn to the UN, someone from the UN who wanted to be here today, Shai Naidas. He is at UNICEF. He is an example of how the UN is learning and adopting foresight. He's the Chief of Youth Engagement and Strategy, and he's going to say in a few words why it's been so important at the UN working with young people and futures, if the technology works.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's feeling energized for your day 2 at Quest to Learn. It is a pleasure to be sending a message today to all of you. My name is Shai Naidas. I'm the Chief of Youth Engagement and Strategy at UNICEF in Inocenti. And I have the absolute pleasure of leading our Youth Foresight function. So before I share a bit more about that, let me start by sharing some visions of a preferred future that young people shared with us. So imagine a world where every young person grows up knowing with certainty that their voice genuinely shapes the decisions that guide their future. A world in which technology is designed to strengthen civic participation and cannot fracture it. A world in which technology enables collaboration and partnership across generations. Imagine cities powered by diverse renewable energies where climate solutions are co-created with young people, and climate education is available, hands-on, and rooted in indigenous knowledge and emotional intelligence. And imagine schools that honor multiple forms of intelligence, emotional, artistic, ecological, where peace and well-being are treated as prerequisites for learning. These are some of the visions of preferred futures that young people shared with us this year as they explored the futures of education. So we do this work through what we call Youth Foresight, or our Youth Foresight function, which we often define as the work that happens in the intersection of meaningful youth participation and strategic foresight. And this is, of course, grounded in child rights, so in the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And especially, I would highlight 3 articles, which are Article 12, known as the right to participate, which is the right for children to be heard in all matters affecting them. Then Article 13, which is the right to express themselves and have access to information. And then also Article 29, the right to an education that develops their full potential. So when you combine these rights with long-term governance challenges, whether it's AI, the climate crisis, or inequality, it's quite obvious that children and young people need to be part of the discussions today and of the decisions shaping the future. So youth participation here should not be seen as optional or nice to have, but it is truly grounded as a right. So what we know is that young people, unfortunately, are still mostly excluded from spaces of policy and decision making. And in a way, this has huge consequences, and there have been tremendous investments recently at a UN level in order to tackle this issue and support intergenerational governance ultimately. So on one hand, we have UN 2.0, which is the UN Secretary General's initiative promoting new capabilities that are necessary to tackle the increasingly uncertain, unstable world that we live in. And one of those 5 capabilities is strategic foresight. And then on the other hand, we have a major investment in youth participation and engagement in global policy. And so the work that we're doing with Youth Foresight really aims to tackle both of, not tackle, but is connected to both of these global efforts and investments. So at UNICEF Innocenti, we kicked off this function of Youth Foresight in order to tackle a lot of the challenges that young people face when it comes to their participation in policy and decision making. As we know, they are too often locked out of those spaces and opportunities. And in a way, what we need is new models that test and that demonstrate how we can work with young people in more meaningful ways that are ultimately more impactful. And even better, if we're working with them, applying strategic foresight so that their insights, their recommendations are anticipatory and long-term. And so this is why at UNICEF Innocenti, the way that we work with young people through our Youth Foresight function is through our Youth Foresight framework, which ultimately seeks to tackle all of these barriers that young people are currently facing in these spaces. So we do this through our fellowships. We enlist fellows across the world. We train them on child rights. We train them in strategic foresight. And then they run their own child and youth-centered foresight exercises, workshops, and do their own research at a country level in partnership with our UNICEF country officers in order to elevate the insights and ideas with children and young people, not only that can challenge some of our assumptions and thinking, but that can truly be seen as equal contributions as we're articulating our strategies and making decisions in a specific area. And this year, the focus was on the future of education. So in this framework, we have 4 steps. The first one is, what is the now? So it's about working with young people in order to define what is the scope. This is about not just focusing on the things that an institution thinks are important, but to genuinely work with young people to understand what are their concerns, what are their priorities, and integrate those into our thinking from the onset. So step 1 is what's the now. Step 2 is what's next. So this is about horizon scanning. So working with young people and youth networks, we've been conducting horizon scanning. And this year, exploring the futures of education, youth identified over 140 signals of change. And this has been very insightful because some of these signals were absolutely not captured or not part of current global discourse when it comes to the future of education, demonstrating that it really is important to bring children and young people into these discussions, especially if we're focusing on the future of education. Students need that agency and to be involved in these discussions. So after we have defined what is the now and what is next, step 3 is what if. So this is about working with young people in order to design scenarios, in order to articulate possible futures, anticipate possible disruptions and opportunities, but also to articulate what those preferred futures look like. What are those preferred futures that they wish to be a part of? And in those preferred futures, steers for us when it comes to our recommendations and input into our strategy design.
Finished. Okay. Shai was actually supposed to be here, which is why we wanted to give him the space, because he does spectacular work bringing together a bunch of young people around the world that then can connect to decision making and help create the policies for peace and security in San Pablo, in Colombia, all the way through to in Bangladesh. So a huge shout out to Shai. He wasn't able to come here, but we'll send him love anyway, over to where he is. And now we're coming to the last few minutes of this session. And this has been a journey about education, about technology, about the future. But what I hope that you've really got is that Futures and Foresight is a practice that can make this journey deeply human and deeply environmentally embedded. We are all learners, whatever age we are. We all have to listen, and we are all apprentices on this journey. And in fact, some of the people that's most important to listen to are the signals of change from the people that can tell us about the future of the Foresight field. And I'm just going to share a few things, 4 signals from the young Foresight practitioners that they themselves are exploring what that future looks like. And none of it is about technology, although it is about how technology is used. First of all, is that young Foresight practitioners are using futures in moments of stress and conflict and trials. This is Amara in Sri Lanka using Futures and Foresight because of religious minority violence. Murshid in Bangladesh's Cox's Bazar to build hope for refugee children. Wen from Tibet talking about her culture being erased online. And also Afriana, who is in Indonesia talking about land degradation. The second pattern is that Futures and Foresight is going to be increasingly more about grief and loss and collective response. Young people realize that the changes and the disruptions ahead are going to be dramatic. We need ways of understanding grief and loss, as well as collective building. We also see a third pattern, which is young Foresight practitioners this is a process for bringing deliberation and young people in connection with the decision makers. Whether it's urban planning, whether it's rethinking space technologies, whether it's rethinking education, it's got a practical element. Let's create in policy together. And finally, there's something around how it's about enabling voice. So you've got indicators, intergenerational fairness assessments. Young Foresighters want to ask decision makers today, how fair is your decision? Which generations are bearing the cost of the decisions that you're taking today? We also have, in India, one of the most exciting things that is happening in the Futures and Foresight field is actually being nurtured by not just Pratiksha Singh, but also someone here in the audience. Vidit, please wave. This is probably one of the most exciting movements in the field, futures methods from around the world, spotlighting historically overlooked practices that mean that all communities around the world can tap into the power of foresight, and this can be a genuinely powerful process that is accessible to all. And Mansi Parekh is the India lead who is collecting all the different types of practices and methods from across India. So, I am now going to leave you to think about, here are some resources. If you care about intergenerational fairness and designing conversations with young and old, look at the Intergenerational Fairness Toolkit. If you are an organization or a government, look at how you can build a curriculum or using that policy toolkit for decisions. If you are in schools or a policy educator in universities, use that. We can also support with different types of training and resource, and look at what UNICEF actually has as well. All of this, I have a QR code, you can find it at the end, but I wanted to bring us back to where we started. Can you remember what I asked you to do? 1, 2, 3? Yeah? Okay. Let's come back to it. So, let's spend a minute in silence now, so you can write down and you can reflect. What is your big aha? What's reframed for you? What are 2 things you commit to yourself to do differently? And write down what are 3 resources, toolkits, case studies, examples that you want to use and take away. So, 30 seconds to reflect. Close your eyes. Let it sink deep. Like yesterday's, often this is about letting your shoulders relax, going into your stomach, and thinking deeply, what of all that you've had thrown at you, what do you really want to take forward? There's no right or wrong. There's just the thing that you need that's right for you and your community in the here and the now. Okay, you may want to write that down, or what I would like to invite you to do is to go to Menti and perhaps add that one aha. We'll then capture them all, and that can be our mood board for our conversation together today. So go to the same code as before, 6446 7397, and then just write one word or perhaps a phrase that summarizes your one big aha. What's changed? What's been impactful? What has reframed for you? And Shalini, whenever the time is right, it's, oh, thank you. Yes. Brilliant. It's not the ideas, people judgment, Start thinking you'll land somewhere. Lots of barriers. It's not the people that change the world. Okay. We'll continue to get people's inputs throughout. I'm just trying to get out of the sun. And any more inputs that people want to add? Shalini, can you refresh? Understanding the actors within each horizon, shaping the future with youth, future thinkers archetypes, be informed and aware, use 3 horizons, build capacity across the whirlpool. We need a future generations bill in India. Come and talk to me, by the way. Not just this generation, but multiple generations. All I can say is what a fantastic group of people you've been. I'm going to leave you with one more slide with a QR code in case you want to get some of those resources. And let me just say a huge thank you from me and Rohan for the session today.
Great, thank you.